Okay, we're continuing our demonstration here of iron and oak, and we covered gunnery here pretty extensively. In our case here, we hypothetically showed what would happen under the most severe instances of gunnery. You can have anything from it bouncing off the armor to it cracking the armor to it really cracking the armor and causing a critical hit in a particular component of the ship. Now, in this particular case here, the gunnery of the Nahant was a double charge. So on the event, per the event card, it says, if I get the thing to show up here, it says that you have to roll a challenge, and the challenge die rolls a d10 and a d8, and the response to that challenge is a d6. If the challenge fails, then the armament on the Nahant is going to take damage. So we roll a d10, and it's a 10. So there's no way a 6 can beat that. So the challenge will succeed. So there's no damage due to the double charge. If he'd rolled something like a 1 or a 2, and the response roll was higher than that or equal to that, then there would be damage to the armament, in which case you would put a critical hit marker, find one here, like so. You put one of these guys on there. I think that's the one. And there would be a -1 modifier to gunnery on future rolls, that sort of thing. Arnold asked a question about the type of shot. Without a card play, is it always standard shot? Yes, absolutely. You probably saw already on the screen, there's double charge, for double shot. There are incendiary rounds, which aren't terribly useful in this particular battle with the iron ships, although you can cause a fire on the enemy ship, but you really want to be in close to try to make this work. There are battles like against the CSS Alabama, like the duel, I believe, that took place off of France. So not all the battles are ironclad. Some of these are with wooden vessels, in which case the incendiaries would be great. There's also grape shot, and I think that's the last type of special ammo. And what grape shot does is it hurts the crew, or it could also damage the smokestack. If the particular ship has a smokestack notation on it, it could be vulnerable to having its smokestack shot up by the grape shot, in which case the ship's mobility will be hampered. And again, the cards, these are the options that side has for the course of the game. So once I've used double shot, I do not replenish that card in my hand. That's gone. So I want to pick my shot with those cards. Can the crew fire muskets in close quarters? No, not really. Trying to think if is there any card. I'm trying to think of any cards in the deck that would do anything approaching. I think really grape shot kind of symbolizes that. The only instances where you would really have that, Arnold, would be on the wooden ships. With the ironclads, a lot of times the crew, they're just firing cannons, and there's not a whole lot of musketry like you would have in the Age of Sail. So some of that could be considered to be abstracted within the grape shot card itself. And of course, I have not showed it because I'm not 100% competent with all of the, and confident in all of the mechanics of the game, except for gunnery and maneuvering. I haven't played it really enough to really demonstrate how you can ram enemy vessels. And in this particular battle, really only the Atlanta has a good chance of causing severe damage by ramming, because it's going to throw a D10 and a D6, and it has a spar torpedo. But you can ram enemy vessels in the game, and with certain ships, it can cause an awful lot of damage. But that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of the most basic elements of the game here involving gunnery. I can set up a situation here for crossing the T. Once you're both in the same hex, a ship like the Atlanta could attempt to cross the T, in which case they would do a maneuver, but they would have to give them the order like so during the orders phase. So if you had the maneuver 0 crossing the T, you could attempt that. And then if you look at the maneuver chart, it says when you are attempting to cross the T, there's going to be a -1 modifier to your maneuver roll. So with the Atlanta, he would roll a D10 again because he's taken one hit, but he's within the threshold. And in this case, he rolls a whopping 9, okay? So now the defensive roll, according to the charts, if you're maneuvering within the same grid box, it's a D8 and a D4. So there's no way to defeat the 9. Well, actually, the 9's modified down to an 8, so there is one chance. But he fails it. He'd have to roll an 8 on the 8 to stop that. So the D8 and the D4 was just a 4. So in this case, the Atlanta would have crossed the T on the Nahant, and then the Atlanta can choose whether or not he wants to go bow on or stern on. Now with this ship, you would, I think, always want to go stern on because he can't fire at you through the stern. And so he's under smoke, and he is stern on. You might ask, why would you ever want to go bow on? Well, maybe in former gunnery, you've damaged the bow of the ship, and the armor plating is weaker there. Well, by crossing the T, you could focus your fire on that particular part of the ship. Because once you're stern on, you can only hit the midships, the stern, or the waterline. You cannot hit the bow at this stage. Any bow hits are considered to be stern hits. So your ability to hit the bow would be enhanced. Now, of course, Dennis just brought up the issue of draft. Let me show you how that works. Because if he's moving into a shallow draft area, the draft on the Atlanta is a 2, and the shoals there are 1. So he's vulnerable to grounding. So here's what would happen. Let me look it up here and make sure I do this right. It's in my rule book under hazards. All right, shoals. If the shoal depth in the grid box is less than the ship's draft, which it is here, the ship runs aground. You have to determine if the ship runs aground. The controlling player rolls a challenge die roll. You roll a D10 if the current draft is 1 more than the shoal depth. Okay, our draft is 2, shoal depth 1, so we're going to roll a D10, which is an 8 here. Okay, the challenge, the opposing player rolls a response of 1d10 and 1d6. We're not going to bother with the d6, but we'll roll another d10. In this case, it's a 10. So he had a 30% chance of making that work. With the challenge rolling an 8, the response roll had to be an 8, 9, or 10 in order to make the challenge fail. So in that case, he would actually be grounded. And you would do that whenever you entered that hex, or excuse me, that box. You only check for the hazard if the ship drifts or maneuvers into a new grid box or attempts to maneuver within the starting grid box, and that grid box is shoal depth. Oh, okay. So rolling within the grid box actually would have happened here. So in this case, he wouldn't be able to cross the T. He would actually be grounded. So we'd have to put a marker on there to denote that. I've got to find it here. So he would actually be grounded on him. Now, once he's grounded, he becomes extraordinarily vulnerable to enemy gunfire, and of course, the enemy's gonna be able to cross the T on him, circle around and just pummel him. But that's how the shoal depth thing, grounding, would work. Now, to try to refloat him on future turns, what he would have to do is find the order for drifting and refloat, in which case he would simply challenge once again. He'd roll a D10. Which is a 3. He could modify that if he had another ship that was trying to tow him. You can tow enemy vessels in the game, in which case he would get a modifier. So if there was another vessel around that could tow him, he could try to get off the shoals that way. But otherwise, he'd have to re-challenge and try to get off the shoals under his own power. So that's really the nuts and bolts of it. I'm not going to show you ramming attacks because, again, I haven't played it enough to really get that mechanic down. It's like gunnery. You're going to throw challenge die rolls and that sort of thing, and it's going to be a function of maneuver, not gunnery. So it's as you maneuver, you determine the damage or if there's any fouling of the two vessels, that sort of thing. I know the damage from a ram attack can be very severe because you are hitting the waterline, And if you strike the vessel hard enough, you can cause substantial damage, sometimes a lot more damage than your guns will, because these guns really didn't have armored piercing rounds yet. So a lot of these rounds are just shattering on the iron. So if there's any other questions, I'll be happy to field those. This is a shorter demo, but again, I just want to show the nuts and bolts of the system. The game comes with a ton of ships. There's a lot of cards. You can see here you have the variety of the wooden ship, the CSS Alabama, which you can see is all wood with very light armor and a very, very small battery of a D8. You have ships like the Albemarle. You have the Arkansas, which is a pretty interesting vessel. The CSS Bombshell, I believe, was a ram. Drury, Florida, and then you have fort batteries. Fort batteries are kind of cool. I haven't played any of the. I've only really played just this one Wassaw scenario, and I played it just like over and over again to make sure I had gunnery and shoals and that sort of thing down, and worked out how smoke and affects things. But the fort batteries work just like a ship, except that they don't maneuver. They just stay up in one single box. And so you're going to be maneuvering relative to the position of that particular fortress battery. And so each battery has an armor value, of course, and a gunnery value, and can only take so many hits to its crew before it's going to be put out of action, or to its the actual guns can only take so many hits. In this case, Fort Gaines can take 5 hits. There's Fort Morgan. Of course, the Union has the Monitor. You have ships like the Brooklyn, Chickasaw, Cincinnati, Essex, Galena, Hartford, Hunchback. One of my favorite ones. This one blew up in the Mississippi, if I remember right, but the Indianola is a pretty cool looking ship. So anyways, it comes with quite a few ships. The card deck, the action cards, I think it's 55 cards. There is no real line of sight in the game except for smoke, and you can, let me show you this situation, you can have the situation like so. If you had the Nahant where it is now, the Weehawken where it is now, then this ship, the Atlanta, could not sail past both. It would have to enter that box or that box. So there are some rules that govern that, but there are no line of sight modifiers per se. That part of the game has been abstracted. And it really has been abstracted for playability. You can play really large scenarios like Mobile Bay and so forth, and you can play them a lot quicker than you could do the same battle with a much more detailed system like Ironclads or Ironclad by Yaquinto Excalibur, where you have to plot the movement of all your ships and everything. I mean, that's great if you like that level of detail, but this one here is giving you a lot of the feel of these battles without so much of the rules overhead. There's a considerable amount of detail in the rules for critical hits and what they do, and a lot of the rules that are the space in the rule book is taken up by dealing with critical hits. But it's one of those things that you really don't have to do anything with until it happens. So, I mean, once you have a critical hit, I look it up in the rule book, find out, okay, what does that do to me now? So it's not something, this is not a hard game to jump into and learn. Obviously, it's still under development, and I have some questions for the designer I want to pass along because I've been just kind of play testing it solo. And by the way, I think it plays really well solitaire. I mean, obviously you have some hidden information in your action cards. There really isn't Fog of War beyond the action cards that you have in your hand. There are optional rules for Fog of War on the ships that you can use, but it's optional. You can see here I flipped the Weehawken over, and I have not read up on those rules, so I can't tell you a whole lot about it, but that is an optional rule, so you don't know the exact identity of an enemy vessel until it's right there upon you, that sort of thing.